Thank you, everyone. Magical chairs. Thanks very much. So I am delighted to welcome our panel. We're going to be focusing now for the next 20 minutes on climate tech. You've heard a bit about, I think, nuclear fusion today. You've heard about carbon dioxide removal technologies. We're going to go into the detail of the kind of breakthrough technologies we need to solve the decarbonisation challenge. So I'm Group Chief Sustainability Officer at HSBC. I've got a brilliant panel here. We've got Hans Kobler, who is founding partner of Energy Impact Partners, an investment firm, probably one of my favorite investment firms if you think about the climate tech space. Look at venture, early stage investing as well. Also, I think infrastructure investing. So Hans from Energy Impact Partners. Over here, an old friend of mine, Steve Howard, who is Chief Sustainability Officer of Temasek, and previously was Chief Sustainability Officer of IKEA, of course, which we were just talking about, and CEO of the Climate Group. We both chair the Women in Business Coalition, so we go back there. And then we've also got Jimmy, who is CEO of Samatis, who is I got it right, who is CEO of LanzaJet, so a climate tech pioneer company there. I'm just going to adjust this because I think I have a few sound issues there. So I'm going to get us kicked off. So climate tech in this space, and I think probably just to start, the boom and bust of clean tech was quite focused back in the kind of noughties, the 2000s, on the energy segment. Climate tech is a much broader segment, cutting across different industries, looking at regenerative agriculture, looking at transforming heavy industries, mobility, energy. So it's a much broader class. And it's been a really hot, frothy investment market recently. And maybe if I can turn to you first, Hans, to give us a bit of a state of the market on climate tech investing.
Thank you for having me. Well, I leave the macro picture out for a moment because it's probably pretty depressing for everybody between the recession, the interest rate environment, the global supply crisis. So focusing just on climate, I think that's a much brighter picture, where the good news is I think the world has embraced that clean tech or climate is important. That goes from cities to states to countries to corporations. 90% of our GDP have concluded that we have to do something. We have to go clean. That means, a lot of money will have to be spent. Somewhere between $6 to $9 trillion is the assumption that McKinsey just put out. And so having done this for 25 years, I felt really lonely for the first 23 years of my career, and I really crowded the last 2 years, and now I'm trying to figure out what is happening in the last 2 months, where I think we have a little bit of a correction here, but overall I think we are at a very attractive stage. We will have some stumbling blocks along the way, where some of the investors that maybe are not so familiar with our industry have left, the Tiger Cups, the hedge fund folks that saw arbitrage opportunity between maybe inflated SPAC valuations and the private markets. They came in very quickly and very big, and they may be gone. But there's a lot of capital coming in, and we're just at the beginning of that.
Yeah, excellent. And maybe, Steve, you can build on a bit from an Asia perspective and the climate tech market as well.
I think it really is it's our global marketplace now, and as an investment firm, especially one with a long-term perspective, I think it's incredibly exciting. So you're right, Hans, the macro conditions, whether it's climate change or the war, are really challenging, but the level of innovation and companies coming through at different stages, so the super early ones, or the ones that are sort of really commercializing, getting to scale, like Jimmy's company now. We're looking at it as very wide. So it's the food systems. Let's say energy's most mature, still got a long way to go, but the energy revolution is a third, half of the way through, although there's still a lot more to go. There's the next phase companies you mentioned some, but we've been investing in them that you wouldn't expect perhaps an investor like us. So we're an investor in Commonwealth Fusion, so as a long-term bet on fusion. We've invested in advanced geothermal companies, a Canadian company called Evor, that does really interesting closed loop, shallow, like a couple of kilometers. I didn't know that. I think it's for every mile you go down, it gets 42 degrees hotter. just around the world. So you can do shallow geothermal, you don't need magma sources down there. We've been looking at zero carbon, low carbon cement companies and invested in those. But then also looking at sustainable materials and the sort of, let's say, if the 20th century was using petrochemicals as a platform, now we're using nature as a platform. So it's about the sun and the wind and renewable materials as a platform. So a company via a JV that we've set up with BlackRock, Decarb Partners, we've just invested in MicaWorks. MicaWorks is a mushroom leather company. And so when it sounds exotic, it's actually strange that we make leather from cows is a strange thing. And we've been doing it a long time. Whereas mushroom leather, it's a climate positive leather. It's like calf skin. It's cost effective. Could be super scalable. And if you look across all of the sustainable materials, it's very, very hot space. And food and ag, I think, the food systems could be climate positive systems if we get it right. So whether that's sort of, the vertical farming, regenerative agriculture, smart optimized agriculture, so we've been looking at that space and investing in micro-irrigation companies or software-based companies, or the alt protein space and plant-based foods. So we were early investors in Impossible Burgers, Impossible Foods, and helped them move into Singapore. And I overate Impossible Burgers on my first trip to Singapore.
Easy to.
But I think now you can see from just perhaps 5 or 10 companies in that space, if you go back 5 years, there's a couple of hundred companies from startup phase through to properly commercialized at scale companies that are in the plant-based food and alternative protein. And just as an endpoint, I like the fact, Singapore's interesting because it can do sandboxing, so it'll do fast regulatory approval, which I think is important for governments anywhere when you're looking at innovation and rolling out new technology. So the first cell-based chicken was approved there. We've also invested in a company that can ferment egg-based proteins. Egg whites are just 50 proteins and water, so they can ferment those proteins. So we've got a company that can make eggs without the chicken and one that can produce chicken without the eggs.
Yeah.
And I think that's the level of climate innovation that we've got now, which is, I think, is exciting and compelling.
Very exciting. Good. And so I'm coming over to you, Jimmy, because obviously you're the founder here on the panel with a kind of SAF-based company. And obviously, the interesting thing from, you're probably sitting in an area that is, you have investors like we have the two here. You're probably one of the, as I mentioned, such a hot and frothy market. Everyone wants to invest in LanzaJet. And then we look at the reality of today also where we have rising food prices. We have the cost of capital is now kind of getting higher and higher and higher. Where do you see your outlook? Obviously, you've got a very strong secular trend behind you. The aviation industry needs and is committed to decarbonising, but what's the outlook? And also, do you need any regulatory support and beyond just the kind of the voluntary commitments of the airline sector?
Yeah, so really it's all of the above. So transportation, I think everyone here experiences it, right, and flies and understands what aviation's contribution is to climate change. In terms of numbers, it's more than 2% of man-made GHG emissions are contributed to aviation. So a significant opportunity to decarbonize a really difficult to decarbonize sector. Right, you have assets that are in the market for 40, 50 years. You have infrastructure that's been built for many, many years. And the industry, by and large, has concluded that sustainable aviation fuel is the only solution that is going to be the near, mid, and long-term opportunity for aviation to decarbonize. Hydrogen and electric aircraft will have their place for shorter haul, medium haul flights, and starting in 2035 and beyond. So sustainable aviation fuel is really where a lot of the attention is. We've spent 14 years trying to get to this point today, which is having the opportunity to have technology that's ready, that produces fuels that are of the right quality and that are of the right safety characteristics, but reduce the overall carbon emissions. So technologies like ours are ready to scale. It's required a lot of work to get here. We have to go through technical approval processes to get even pathways approved through the ASTM. It's the approving body for these fuel pathways. That takes 3 to 5 years just to get through that process alone. So we're at a point where technology is ready. You have governments who are now stepping up across the globe with effective policies that support the development of the industry. You have airlines who are committed, who are voluntarily committing to it. And you have corporate customers and individuals who are now also participating. So all those factors have to come together in order to really see this industry take off. And we are truly creating a new industry. This is new infrastructure that needs to be developed around the world. It requires investment. We've had a lot of strategic investors engaged with us to give us cost-efficient, cost-effective capital. So we're trying to keep the price down as low as we can for sustainable aviation fuel.
And clearly it's already a very kind of cost-conscious sector. You know, margins are very tight in the airline industry, and there is a greenium for SAFs. And then when we head now into more of a recession environment next year, does it become even more vital at this point in time that you have moves like, you know, setting a mandate for SAFs within a fuel mix, or, you know, tax credits and things like that?
You do. You absolutely do, right? So in the European Union and the UK, mandates are the preference from the governments and even some of the players in these countries. In the US, you have more of an incentive-based approach. We have a strong preference towards incentive-based approaches because they reward incremental improvements in the product ultimately. What we're seeing today, even though fuel prices are up, crude oil pricing is up, jet fuel pricing is up quite substantially, it's creating an interesting opportunity because our SAF pricing isn't necessarily increasing at the same level, right? So SAF has become more affordable, relatively speaking, compared to current fuel pricing. Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to go deep because the climate tech ecosystem is so big, and you mentioned a whole load of new ones, Steve, that I hadn't even heard about with the egg whites. You know, you've got everything from soft tech to hardware and hard tech. And, you know, if we think about what we need to get to 2050, we've kind of got the technologies we need for the next 10 years of decarbonization. It's the stuff between 2030 and 2050, especially in the hard-to-abate sectors like in long-haul transport, where we've got the big technology challenges. And in many cases, they are, you know, whether it's green hydrogen, energy storage more broadly, long-term energy storage, whether it's SAFs, whether it's carbon dioxide, you know, carbon removal technologies. These are kind of high capex investment, high technology risk because they're very nascent technologies. So that, you know, our credit risk teams in the bank obviously are not familiar with these technologies at HSBC, trying to get used to them. So when we look at those, it would be great to hear the feedback from, you know, the panel here on how do we start unlocking the deep decarbonization technologies? What are some of the partnerships that we need? Maybe starting with you, Steve. Yeah,
no, I think it's a really important question. Something I think it's how you look at risk is important, because I think the finance sector is guilty of pricing new risk differently from old risk. And so if we look, and now the future's more decoupled from the past is a poor predictor of the future, especially when it comes to decarbonisation. So we've got to say the risk of standing still is extremely high. We can't stand still. So you've got to be prepared to take more risk around the future anyway. So it's a mindset adjustment, not just a pricing and risk appraisal adjustment. And then you absolutely need partnerships in this. So we do need the regulators to step in and do what I mentioned in Singapore, doing sandboxing, you know, fast, rapid regulatory approval, and we need those sort of things to happen. And then look at where do you play. I mean, we're mostly an equity investor. We're not we don't do sort of big infrastructure. So we're looking at who are the partners we've got alongside us who might be able to deploy different types of capital into the infrastructure, and where do we play our role within that. But the technology is de-risking pretty fast, and I think the tailwind itself, if you understand, so we go really, really deep in trying to understand at a science level and fundamental technology level, does this work, and should it stack up? Yeah. So understanding that side, if we're confident in that, then we will really plough in behind it, whether it's on green hydrogen or novel electrolyzers or on advanced geothermal, like I mentioned. And would you do that without a kind of blended finance approach, like a loan guarantee, or do you do that purely commercially, or do you need some? I mean, we'll do some of it absolutely commercially where we have conviction behind it, and it depends. If you're looking to scale something, let's say I don't know, maybe everybody wasn't surprised, but I've certainly been surprised by how hydrogen's gone from, you know, interesting, you know, there to absolutely a big part of the energy future in the last 2 years, it feels like to me. And the amount of public money, policy support, industry offtake agreements, you start to look, this ecosystem starts to come together very rapidly, where you can see how you can de-risk scaling of large-scale hydrogen.
Yeah.
And I think that's the way we're going to have to do it, whether it's for SAF and sustainable aviation fuel, offtake agreements, etc. There's a whole range of tools that you can do to de-risk it. I think we're going to have to scale these things, and there's a real willingness to do that in between regulators, between industry, corporate partners, and the finance sector now.
Yeah.
So it's taken 70 years with solar to do the first trillion watts. It's 4 years. I like this fact. It's Bloomberg New Energy Finance. It's not my fact, but it's 4 years, I think, to get to the next trillion watts. Incredible progress, but it was 70 years. If you look at energy storage, sustainable aviation fuel, green hydrogen, we don't have 70 years. We need to do it in 10, 15 years to get to massive scale. So we're going to need all of the tools in the toolbox on it. But I see those being deployed increasingly.
I mean, in huge investment costs. I mean, I think in the US and the new hydrogen plant in Utah or the one in Nebraska, we're talking about $500 million capex investment, right, for the first round. So these are massive, massive investments. Hans, maybe over to you. On deep decarbonization tech. What are you looking at in EIP?
Very dear to our heart. We just launched a fund here on that topic. If you think about the bigger problem, 75% of our emissions are related to energy. 80% of that can be electrified. The clean electron has won, right? It's the fuel of choice for most of the future. With that, we can electrify completely new industries: steel, cement. We have investments that account for 21% of the emissions. We have an investment in Boston Metals, for example, Sublime on the cement side, Rondo, address heating. So that's the first step. The second one is how to deal with the intermittency. Now we have this new world where the wind doesn't blow so reliably, and then on the other side, on the demand side, you have the DC fast chargers, the same as 70 TVs turning on at the same time. So you double our load, but the peak power could be 5 times as high, which is a huge problem. It's like you don't build your church for Easter Sunday, right? The size of the church for that. So somebody has to do something about that. Lithium is not, it holds for a couple of hours, so some long-term storage solutions are needed. We have an investment in Form Energy, for example, that has the potential, not very efficient, but very cheap to store energy for 100. So that's a second step. Molecules need to come to the rescue. The electron cannot do it all, so there is a role for gas in transmission that is absolutely critical. There is a pathway to ammonia and hydrogen. Has to still come down a lot on cost, quite frankly, but as you pointed out, most experts were wrong on the pathway of solar, how quickly it came down. We are in electric hydrogen, for example. That's a PEM electrolyzer for green hydrogen. And then the last step is we have to do something about the carbon in the air or at point emissions. If we focus on those 4 things, I think it's doable, but those are big, capex-intensive, long-term efforts that will take a bit.
And maybe go just a little bit, and then we'll move on to Jimmy on the carbon removal technology market. I know there's the talk of, will it be a 1 trillion? How can you make it a 1 trillion market? At the moment, it's very much based on kind of commitments in a way. There's no kind of regulatory forcing mechanism yet for anything there. So where are you in that space? Maybe talk to the audience about some of the different solutions in that space. You've obviously got the direct air capture versus nature-based solutions.
So our CTO, Mike Weber, he just wrote an article on that in the Wall Street Journal. We have one investment in the point solution. The point meaning you go there, capture it at the point of emission, Carbon America, which I think is the first step. The real killer solution would be if you can suck it out of the air, right? And that's just a cost question. We have to come down a lot. We haven't made an investment there yet. We normally sit down with our partners and screen the market, so we are scouting. But if we get towards the $100 a ton, I think would be very attractive. We haven't found the golden goose yet.
I don't know if anyone wants to come in. If Steve, you've got something on, or Jimmy on carbon removal technologies before we move back. Or...
I mean, we've invested in some same times we've been looking at the space. We've not done direct air capture yet. We've looked at it, and it's one of those things. If it's currently $750 a ton or something, you take high conviction to go for that.
Yeah.
But we think that there's no way through this without some CCS somewhere involved in the system. Nature-based solutions are really interesting, and there's actually it's not just planting trees or regenerative agriculture to have nature-based solutions. It's all the monitoring ecosystem around that. It's the sensors. There's several interesting companies come through that space. We just made an investment in one. It's not public yet, actually. That's really looking at how we can reliably measure the carbon in nature-based solutions. And so we think that it's going to be an interesting interplay between, and you will have industrial CCS will definitely be applied in many places, but nature-based solutions can really scale if we can build high trust credibility behind the carbon market. So, we've worked with Standard Chartered, DBS, and SGX to set up a climate impact exchange in Singapore to do sort of literally be in that space to help do price discovery and have high quality, trustworthy carbon that's from nature-based and tech solutions there on the market.
Yeah.
So I think we're in early days. The projections and uncertainty around it are huge. Whether is it $100 a ton in 2030? Is it 20?
Yeah.
And what's the scale of it? But it's definitely it's a huge growth area.
Yeah, and actually in the IEA modelling, there's a big reliability on CCUS, on point source capture for oil and gas after 2035, and there's also quite a reliance on DAX as well. So there definitely needs to be investment. So Jimmy, back to you and Saf. Obviously your company is one of these deep decarbonisation technologies. What are the partnerships that you need? You spoke a bit about the regulatory environment, but what do you need to kind of accelerate and grow in your space?
Sure, and I'll comment on the carbon capture and carbon removal technology as well, right? So we were founded by a company called LanzaTech, which captures carbon from waste carbon. So carbon in industrial processes takes that carbon monoxide and converts it through gas fermentation in their proprietary microbe to ethanol, right?
Yeah.
They've partnered up with Carbon Engineering on direct air capture and are able to pursue that and take the CO2 plus green hydrogen and convert that to ethanol. So there's ways even for SAF to leverage front-end technologies that some have been proven commercially. The LanzaTech technology has been proven commercially with plants up and running in China that actually do this day in and day out. And others like the direct air capture technology, which has some time to go. Although I was at another event this morning speaking, and the Carbon Engineering folks were there, and they have a partnership with Oxy, and they mentioned that they made an announcement not that long ago. They're building 70 plants as their ambition here in the coming few years. So for us, to go to your question, partnerships matter, right? So partnerships in terms of the full value chain of technologies, like with LanzaTech, like with Carbon Engineering and other entities. Corporate partners have played an instrumental role in our company. Microsoft invested directly in an infrastructure project with us in Georgia. So having corporate entities step up and directly support is extremely important. Government's policy makes a huge difference, and that's going to guide which markets develop first for us and where the draw for our technology is going to be. So it takes the full spectrum, if you will, of stakeholders to be aligned and to participate and to help this market develop.
Absolutely. So we've got 5 minutes left, so there's probably time for a quick round. So I wanted to open it up just a bit more broadly to each of you to think about maybe the area of climate tech innovation you're most excited about, beyond the exciting examples that Steve already gave. So what are you most excited about? Maybe going to you first, Hans.
We have to first define excitement. So we have financial firms.
Financially excited and impact.
We get excited when we make money. We work with corporates, so we get excited when we help them on their journey to net zero, get there faster. And we get excited when we have an impact on the environment. We get really excited when we put the two together. So when that's one of our major efforts is to really bring the partners together to make innovation happen. For example, you mentioned Microsoft. They just picked up one of our portfolio company, Enchanted Rock, to use them as a backup for the data centers, replacing diesel, which is a major issue out here. We have a company called Urbint that is using AI to detect methane leaks in urban environments. We helped them get 4 out of their first 6 customers to ramp them quickly. So when that collaboration happens between our now 100 portfolio companies and 40 industrials, I think good things happen because we cannot wait for the deep decarbonization technologies that we just talked about. That will take 2, 3, 4. Somebody has to do that, yes, and we're doing that. But we have to do something now. And so accelerating the deployment of technologies that are out there today is probably highest on my list.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of brilliant software climate tech companies, and I think I read the stat the other day that if you look at the unicorns, the fastest growing segment of unicorns is climate tech companies, and the life span or the age of the unicorns is younger than any other segment. So sometimes 4 to 6 years to reach unicorn status. So it's been a crazy market, let's say, especially over the last few years. Jimmy, what about you?
Larry Fink was here, right? He said the next 1,000 unicorns will be in climate
tech. Oh yeah,
tech.
he said that.
And I have to say, the first 20 years of my career, I don't remember 20.
Yeah.
There were 28 in last year alone. Right? So
yeah,
that's,
exactly. Big growth. Jimmy?
Yeah, so for me, we have a slogan that we use, which is someday is now, and we use that intentionally, which is it's no longer a need for us to wait someday for solutions to be in place. We no longer have the ability to wait someday to take action on climate change.
Yeah.
And I honestly think that we have really good technologies that are deployable today, that are scaling today, that work today, and that create the right products today. We need to accelerate existing technologies while continuing to do the good work that's required for those higher impact longer-term technologies, right? So there's good solutions in the marketplace today. There's a huge SAF plant going into Singapore. That's an example of a technology that's been scaling over the last 6, 7 years, and that one is continuing to scale. But we're at that tipping point where we have to take action. We have technologies that are ready. Money's flowing in. Airlines are doing their job as well, and we just need to get going.
Well, I'm very excited about LanzaJet and LanzaTech, so I'm excited for you. And then maybe Steve to wrap up.
I gave my thunder away at the start in this question. But I think it's more in the spirit of that. I think if you say from a sort of design challenge, looking at what do we need the world to be, so we're going to have, we're going to end pollution, we're going to reverse the decline in nature, and business and investment's going to drive that, which is exciting and compelling. And so we are going to have incredible, abundant, affordable, clean energy with universal access, incredible clean mobility that's available for people, a built environment that's more fit for purpose, and hopefully a food system that's healthy and sustainable and largely plant-based. And that's all possible. There's a scenario where you can say by 2050 we've ended global warming and we've reversed the decline in nature. And so I'm excited about all the things that we're doing to get there and that we're scaling and are coming through. I'm even more excited about the clear knowledge there are things that will happen in the next year, 5 years and 10 years that will surprise and delight us that we don't know about at this point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a perfect way to end. Thank you very much, Steve. Okay, so I just wanted to say a big thank you. Maybe we can have a round of applause for our panel. That was fantastic. Thank you. Thank you.